Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Sarah Mitchell, our Director of Customer Success. Here, Sarah has got a quick demo of things to do, and she'll be here to answer your questions, hence the name Demo and Q&A. Of course, you can type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we're also available by email at guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. So let's get started, Sarah. I can already see your screen, so we're ahead of the game.
Excellent. And I assume you can hear me as well.
And I can hear you as well.
Wonderful. So I know Dave said quick, but today we're going to talk about the release we just put out last week, Alpha Anywhere 4.6.3.8. It's got a lot of features in it, and I'm going to very quickly try to cover all of them. And then we'll have a little bit of a demo at the end. So
Awesome.
there's a lot in this feature, in this new release. And here are some highlights, some things that you might be interested in, places we've made changes. Some of these things are getting called out as a single line item because we put a lot of focus on them. Other more general categories like data integration, where we've done a bunch of little things that could make your life easier. So we're going to go through this. There's going to be a few extra things at the end that I think might be helpful for your life. If you don't know how to get the release, you can install it using the installer. If you are new to Alpha Anywhere and you've only ever installed Alpha Anywhere once, to get the update, you'll want to launch Universal Installer, go over to your Available tab, which lists everything that you've installed using the installer, and then click the Update button, and it should update you to the current stable release. You can also use the maybe it's installed and available. Let's go look at it real quick. Trying to do this from memory. All right, so installed list where things you've installed. If you come in here, say here, I haven't updated my application server for IIS yet on my stable build here. If I click that button, it's going to update me to the current release. You can also come over to available and then install it to the default location, or if you would like to install this somewhere else to test things before you deploy to it, I strongly recommend you can do that. You just need to change your installation location here. Make sure you're on the most recent build, which is currently 7902, and then run that install, and you're good to go to start testing. So that's how you can get it. If you need help with that, by all means, ask it now. We can go over it in more depth later if we need to do that. We can also help you offline after the webinar as well at guides@alphasoftware.com. So we've added a lot of new features, and I've kind of broken this up into key highlight big level subjects for you. And image file upload is getting a very special call out this time around because we've done a lot to add something what we're calling Amazon S3 indirect upload, which is a way to add some extra processing, such as the ability to scale the image or add a thumbnail of the image before you upload it to S3. And the way it works is the image upload goes to the application server first and then sends your data up to Amazon S3 where you're storing files. And this support has been added to image upload, file upload, and then we've also added an option when uploading to S3 for desktop apps. So in the past, our image upload for the list specifically would let you upload to S3 if you're running in a mobile environment, but we had a restriction that you couldn't do that in a desktop environment, meaning a web app specifically. And that support has been added, so that should make things a lot easier for some folks who are trying to do that. We've done a lot of updates on the list control, and I've broken this into two categories: in-place editing, which I think deserves a special call out because this is new and we're continuing to refine this feature, and we get your feedback and we're trying to make it better and better. So along those lines, we've added the option to add your own inline styling, which is the ability to say border black or text red, CSS stuff. For select controls, it's not all the types of controls that you can use for in-place editing, but there's a number of them have had this property added to them. And we've also added support to include blank values in your edit combo and drop-down boxes. On the other side of things, elsewhere in the list, we have a new chart field, which we're not going to demo today, but I would like to do a demo on that and our new charting, built-in charting libraries that are coming down the road. We've added an option to copy a column layout. So if you have a list with multiple layouts, you can now use a link at the bottom of the layout screen to take and copy one layout in one column layout and paste that in another one. And the use case for this is we had a customer who was trying to set up a list with a bunch of different views and needed some of the columns to be present in all of them. And the column format had to be the same in all of them. And setting that up manually was a hassle. So by adding the support to copy things, you can quickly get those defaults that you want everywhere, copy to all your layouts, and then make your adjustments as needed. The checked row, oops, we have an option to add a check column, a checkbox column to your list. And this has been changed so that if you've got a list that's paginated, where the data that's shown on the list is all the data we've fetched, and when you go to a new page, we make a callback to the server to fetch the new page of data and bring it down. If you check rows, that's being persisted across pages. So this is something to be aware of if you're using that. And I've spelled multiple wrong there, I apologize. But that's something to be aware of. We've also changed incremental refresh, so it's now supported not only in lists that have editable data, but also in lists without a detailed view. And what incremental refresh does is it just goes up and it fetches the things that have changed. And previously, you could only do this in the list with a detailed view, but now we've added it to lists that don't have a detailed view, so that should improve performance, especially if you've got a lot of data in your list and it's only read-only and you need to get some updates from your server. Moving up further into the builder, into the UX component itself, we've made a few changes here. And if you are using integrated login, which is the login method used in our new login UX that was added in a previous release, when you hit the enter key, that now it simulates clicking the login button. So that's sort of like a ease of use thing, making that simpler for people to use. It's a common behavior you use all over the place. I use it logging into my email. You hit enter after you've entered your username and password, so this support's now just built in. We've also added an option within the freeform layout control itself to disable wrapping child controls with this default div that adds some inline styling to make everything show, behave as if it's on the same line. So with CSS, you have two types of, there are two types of display styles. One of them is block and the other one is inline. And what this wrapping class is doing, or div is doing, is it's adding that inlining so that stuff appears on the same line. So if you want full control over how everything gets laid out, you can turn this off in the freeform layouts properties now. We did a couple of really cool changes for the Viewbox specifically, and also the FormView, and we're going to take a look at this later. A while back, somebody asked, hey, how do I use the tabs in the Viewbox? Because we had these tab and accordion control containers that you could insert, but they weren't doing anything. And that it turns out they weren't doing anything. So we've actually added support for these things. They were in the FormView. They were kind of in the Viewbox, so they weren't doing much. So now you can now use tabs and accordion containers in a Viewbox to add tab layouts or accordion style layouts. So we'll take a look at that. And we've also expanded support to utilize subthemes within both the FormView and the Viewbox on specific types of controls, label, button, switch, and tabs. So we're going to look at that later. But this is, I think this is a pretty cool update. One that might be overlooked by a lot of people, because the Viewbox really is a powerful control that lets you build all sorts of cool UI interfaces, basically like freeform stuff with a data backend. So elsewhere in the UX, we did make some changes to some events. There's an on login event in the UX component that fires when you log in. In the case of persistent login, that event wasn't getting triggered if the user returned to their app and the persistent login determined that they were still logged in and just took them to the next screen where they needed to go. So that's always being fired now. And then we've also added a new after populate new record event, which you can utilize to trigger some sort of workflow after we've populated a new record in the UX control. The UX and the grid component both share this concept called an advanced search control. In the UX, I believe we call it the advanced list search control. But we made some small improvements here. You can now filter your pick lists for dropdowns and stuff like that when providing users with this search control interface. And the advanced search control is nice because it lets people pick columns, comparison behaviors, and what values they're looking at. It gives you a lot more power to sort of like try to drill down into the data that you're displaying the user without going as far as like asking them to like write SQL queries. So, and those can be saved and loaded for the user as desired if you want that kind of behavior. So a very cool control. Definitely take a look at it if you've never heard of it. Moving away from components now. Web themes, we added a flared tab subtheme. And I'm calling this out, one, because it looks really cool, but also because some people have written in asking, like, where is it? I can't find it. And I just wanted to take some time today to specify that, or just say that when you copy a theme, like the alpha theme, to either locally or globally for your entire project, if you make a copy of that theme and you've given it the same name as our system theme, Alpha Anywhere will load that local or global copy. It will not go to the system theme. The system theme is where this is specified. So if you are launching the new release and it's not there, check to make sure you haven't copied the theme. If you have two options there. You can rename it to something that is not alpha. You call it like beta or alpha 2. Just give it a name that isn't one of our system names, or you can delete it. Both very good options. So we'll take a look at what that looks like today. And then moving away from that, getting more into like the data side of things, we have added a bunch of stuff on the data integration side. We've got a new client-side API for IndexedDB. I apologize, the documentation for this is not available yet. It is in the release notes, but we are working on getting examples set up for this because we've built an entire like 12 or 15 client-side functions for you to call into IndexedDB, which is a client-side database that you can use in your applications to store and look up data. We've also expanded what types of Excel files you can connect to using Alpha Dynamic Access Object, DAO, or connection strings. And so we've got a longer list of what types of files you can connect to using Excel. We added the SQL Data Editor, which is a tool for exploring and modifying data in a database. We've added 2 new import tools for importing data from either Excel or JSON into a SQL table. And then a bunch of enhancements have happened to SQL Trace, as well as SQL logging in general. We will not really get into that today, but if you are someone who likes to track what your users are doing through SQL logging, we've added some ways to specify how that data gets logged, how where it's stored either at runtime or design time. And then with regards to SQL tracing and logging, we've added an option to specify the detail of the log. So the SQL trace log is a file that gets generated on the application server in the trace log folder, and all it does is it outputs the SQL query that was sent in and what happened. So if you're having problems with trying to figure out why your SQL queries aren't giving you back the right data or something like that, this is one way to take a look at it. I think what we've added is the ability to like restrict what information is coming back, so you can make those a little bit shorter. So something to look at if you are debugging things on your servers. With respect to the application servers themselves, we've made changes to both. On IIS, we've added the ability to automatically redirect from HTTP to HTTPS, so that support is really good. We've also added an ability to map your Active Directory groups to application groups so that you can use the security that with Alpha Anywhere more easily. Let me pull that up real quick. Sorry, I closed my tab. So you can use Active Directory in IIS to do authentication and authorization with Alpha Anywhere in your web applications, and this is commonly used in larger enterprises where people need to be logged in on the network to access stuff. And so you can now take and define like group names in Active Directory and then map those to groups in Alpha Anywhere to set up your published profiles. And I'm gonna go ahead and grab the documentation page for that, send it to you guys so you can take a look in more depth if that's something of interest to you. I don't have a test environment set up where we can really look at that. But if this is something, if Active Directory is something that people want to learn more about, we can definitely look into getting that set up at a future webinar. There's a lot you can do with it. Again, though, only on IIS. I do not believe we have Active Directory support on the Classic server. Which brings me to my next slide, Classic server. We've added two things there. One, there's a new message that's going to appear in the raw HTTP log if you have that turned on. If when you send data from the server, it gets gzipped, which is it's compressed, so the package is smaller, which is what you want. But there's going to be a message that now appears in that log that explains how to turn that off if you're trying to troubleshoot something. If you turn off gzipping, make sure you turn it back on when you don't need to figure out what's going on anymore, because you do want that enabled. It has a performance impact on your application being served from your server. And then we've also changed the UI in the dialog that appears when you launch the application server, where you can figure all the settings and stuff, and we can take a look at that. This is just in the Classic server and the development server, which is the Classic server. So we'll look at that in the development server and we'll take a peek at what's being shown there. But basically, we've added a way for you to see state of what's going on in your application server while it's actively running. And then a few other things to throw out there. We've added some new Xbasic functions. This find records in SQL table is a helper function to look up records in a SQL table. The way it works is you give it a search criteria and it searches all the fields in that record, not just one. So you don't have to sit there and write like a long where clause to get that. This does it for you. There's a curl get function that's new. That does some stuff with headers. If you want to call into an endpoint to get, do a HTTP get command. So just download the data from a endpoint. JSON combined properties for combining properties from two JSON objects into one. Star S is a string interpolation. What it is, it's just fancy string templating. So what you can do with this function is give it a string that has some placeholders in it for Xbasic variables you've defined in your script, and it will replace those variables with the values. And then also our run image magic command has been upgraded. Basically what we did is we've updated the version of image magic that we're shipping. So now if you want, you can process HEIC files in your Xbasic scripts for images. And then other big announcements, Python can now be used to write server-side scripts. This is a very, I don't want to say beta, but it's still early in its development, but we've added support for Python. So if you have familiarity with Python and would like to use Python in your applications, you can do that now. And I'm going to grab that documentation link for you and put it in the chat. It says beta software at the top because that's where it currently lives in documentation, but we've gotten to the point where we want to tell you about it. And you don't need a feature key, so this is where you can find all the information about our Python integration right now. And I suppose I could pull this up on the screen so people aren't confused in the replay if you don't have access to chat. But here's where the documentation currently lives. One of the cool things that we've added is this Python package installer. When you go in there and install it, we actually pull up this Python page, and then you just need to click this copy button, and then Alpha Anywhere knows how to do the rest to add those packages. And then on the Xbasic side, we've got a helper class, and then this Xbasic execute Python function for running Python in your scripts. So definitely check that out. We can do another session on this in the future if that's something that interests folks. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is publishing. We've added a few changes for publishing that may make your life easier. So the first one is the common folder. And the common folder is a folder where whatever you've put in there will be published with every single project in your workspace. So if you remember, workspaces contain projects. You have more than one project in a workspace, and each project itself is a separate app. And the common folder is a place where you can put shared resources like images or JavaScript libraries, that kind of stuff that will get published with everything. So if you've got apps you've built and you're sharing a ton of stuff and you're copying and pasting it between it, this might be a way for you to kind of eliminate some of that overhead. And then also Alpha Cloud Publishing, there's been a checkbox that's been added to the publish dialog for Alpha Cloud that lets you just publish the currently selected file. So that's the big brain dump of what we've added, which I think is super cool. So we're going to come over here now and we'll take a look at those changes to view boxes. So if we back out of here, and I'll make a new UX component. And we'll click Add Control. We'll grab a view box. Click OK. And then I'm going to double click to open it up. This is the Viewbox builder. The Viewbox is a complex control like the list and the form view and the control bar. It has a data source. It has items which are interactive actions like click, double click events that you can add into it. It has some properties, the layouts where you define how things look. And then a few extra things here. CSS that lives with the control, which you've seen with the list. JavaScript that lives with the control. And then there's a preview tab at the end. So I'm just going to quickly set this up with a data source. All view boxes need a data source. That data can come from a list, a JavaScript function. You could create a database. You could call a REST API. But I'm just going to grab some static JSON here. And I'm going to keep this really simple. It's going to have one record in here. So we don't have to deal with repeating records and that kind of stuff because it gets a little weird looking when you're setting it up at first. So we're just going to focus on the single record here. And if we come over to the layout and we go to the genie and we add an item, here's where you can insert control types, and it's where you're going to find the new tab controls. So if you go over to container, down here you have tab control and tab pane. And these are the two things we've added. The tab is both the tab and it's an accordion. So this is if you want to add an accordion interface, this is where you add it. If you want a tab interface, so we're going to add in a tab interface here. Let's go with name and address. Click OK. And you will see this error. All this means is that the tab panes themselves need a control in them, which we're going to add next. So we'll add in our data controls. I want to put first name and last name in the name. And then I'll select address, and we'll put the city state in there. And I think that's good enough for now. Let's go ahead and look at that. So here's our tab interface here, and there's John Smith. It's all sandwiched together because the Viewbox doesn't make any presumptions about what you want to do with a label. So Boston MA is also going to be sandwiched together here, but this is that tab interface that we've added. And it can also be an accordion, which you can delete everything and insert it again, or you can just come over here and say, I want this tab to be an accordion type. Click OK, live preview. And so what we'll see now is name and address here. So that's setting it up. Here's an example where I did a little bit more work to try to get the first name and last name to look a bit better. Here's the accordion. This is set up to allow multiple tabs to be open at the same time, or accordion spaces. And then this last one is a FormView control I set up to show you how to do sub-themes. So the FormView is like the Viewbox. It also needs a data source. I've set this one to use static JSON, that exact same first name, last name, city, state. I also added deceased as a Boolean variable so we can look at the switch. And then over here in the form layout, what I've done here is I've got first name and last name, and they've both been configured to use the base sub-theme here. But city and state have been modified to use primary. And these are edit controls. So when we open up the sub-theme, here is base, here is primary. So one looks like our text box without any borders. The other one has borders all the way around it. And then the switch control as well also has sub-themes. We don't have any defined in our base themes for the switch. There's just the one. But if you had others, if you created your own, maybe you've made it look like a light switch, this is where you can now set that. So we're going to live preview this. We take a look. So here's those first two that had the base sub-theme are in our edit controls. These two have the primary. Here's our switch control. Clicking on it, it's not going to do anything because it's not configured to be editable. But that's the sub-themes for your form view. And Viewbox as well. If we take a look at this Viewbox, for example, if we come over to the layout and we look at our tab control, there's a sub-theme option here. So we could come in here and say, hey, let's use that flared sub-theme that we've added in the new release. Click OK. And then the other thing we've also added is support on buttons, which you'll find in other controls in here. So if we add a button here, here's where you can set up a button. If you preview here, we have a button is the one that we use a lot in our examples because we have a lot of sub-themes for it. So we came in here and made this like capsule, maybe capsule raised. Click OK. Make sure that got set. There we go. And preview this. So there's our flared tabs, and there's our button using that capsule raised sub-theme. So that's everything I want to talk about. I'm sure there are questions. So let's go on to questions.
All right, there are some questions. Starting right at the beginning, or do we have any plans to create a theme in Alpha Anywhere that's like the transform theme? Because people like what transform looks like.
We've talked about it. That did come up during DevCon, so we'll continue to discuss it. I think we want to do more with our themes, not just make one for transform, but provide some other options.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely something we're talking about internally.
Excellent. Okay, so what's the difference between a Viewbox and a FormView? And why would you use one over the other?
That's a good question. So to answer, the Viewbox it's just like a freeform control with a bunch of settings in it for adding events and multiple layouts and that kind of stuff. And a FormView is a Viewbox that has been enhanced to add support for using things like editor sets. If you want to edit data in a FormView, you need to use an editor set to do it. And I think we might have I think we have a pre-built example. Yes, this one has one. So the FormView is an enhanced Viewbox that works with editor sets that are used to edit your data. And I'm going to look at this real quick to see. It's all static. Perfect. Let's find out if this works.
All right.
I haven't used this in a while. All right, so the form view is on this side. It's connected to this list. So if I select a record, it displays the record here. And then if I click on one of these fields, it opens up this editor setup here. which you can then do stuff in and then save it. Oh, I didn't click the right, there it goes.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was supposed to click that button. And then it goes back over here. So editor sets, we added those to provide a way to edit your data without duplicating a control multiple times, because when you're doing mobile or web or really anything over the internet, the less data you download, the better. So instead of having an interface that has a
Like,
text
let's say
box for
you had
editing all of these fields, is just
yeah.
one. So that same box is used for all of these settings, and the FormView has been configured to work with that.
So if you found yourself in a situation in which you're going against, I don't know, maybe a table that has hundreds of fields, maybe 1,000 fields in it, and for some reason you actually needed to access them all, would
Yeah,
the FormView be the good choice for that one?
it would.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you look at the setup here, your FormView,
Mhm.
it has all the label data, all the definition for the layout in it.
Mhm.
How are you displaying that data? Is it going to be a control, that like a label or a switch control?
Yeah.
But you just have this one control to worry about. If you wanted to do like a list that had 100 columns and you needed to edit 100 columns and you want to do a detailed view on that, you could add 100 controls to your UX to do that, but the form
Mhm.
view is going to be a bit easier to manage. So
That
that's
makes
why.
sense. Yeah. Right. One editor for multiple fields.
Yes.
Nice. Different question. Is there a way to save the body object from an API result so that it can be processed at a later time?
Yes. But the
Okay,
question
good
becomes,
answer.
where are you
Where we?
getting the body? Or is this on JavaScript, or is it an Xbasic?
Mhm.
Uh, and then when is later?
Right. So maybe we can talk about the ways you can get values out of an API result. And let's start with client side, because that's often where we're writing things using Xbasic. It's not the only place, of course, you could do it JavaScript side as well. And then, where it could be written afterwards would be up to you. So like if you put it into a session variable, you would have it during the time that the user is logged in and using your app. On the other hand, if you wanted it like 3 days later, you'd probably either want to write it to a table, or maybe you'd write it to S3 as a file. But I think that I guess that would depend on the circumstances. And it would also depend on how much data, I suppose, that you're getting back from that body object. If it's
Yeah.
huge and you're doing a few of them, maybe you don't want them in session variables using up all your RAM. Maybe you do want to write them to a table. So could we take a look maybe just at things that have to do with API results? I think there's a context dot result object, if I recall.
Context result is going to be from the application server.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go look at let's go look at the useless demo I sent you the other day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't recall a useless demo. You only send useful demos.
Oh no, it's called a useless demo because it uses the useless facts API.
Oh, now that all makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm glad you clarified. We're also a little light on questions, so today is the day. If you want to get your question answered,
Definitely ask those questions.
type it
Everything
in
we
right
just
now.
talked about is on the table.
Yep, and more.
And more. I'm hoping it's here. Ah, there it is. Okay. So
All
there's
right.
there's an API out there. It's called useless facts.
Mm-hmm.
And all it does is return a random fact or the random fact today. And I built this REST service definition to interact with it and
Can
put
you tell
together
me a
an
little bit
Xbasic
about the
script.
REST service definition, first of all?
Yeah, so to back that up a bit,
Yeah.
we have
Is it?
this filter web services,
Uh-huh.
which when you select it, it makes it easy to add in a new service type. So you can connect to SOAP, you can make a new service definition using GraphQL as a service, or you can make a REST one. And
Mm-hmm.
we have two types. We have one that you make, where you're creating a service for others to use. And then we have creating a new definition to consume a REST service. And this is what I use to build up useless facts. We have a few options down here to make your life easier. If you have access to a Swagger definition for the service, you can import it. Click on that link and then paste it in here. Or if you're looking to use one of the Google services, we've got them all listed right here for you to pick from, like the YouTube and some of like YouTube's translating services and stuff like that, which I've used in the past to try to pull data together for our website efforts. Anyway, if you don't want to use either of those things, you would just give this a name here. Demo API. And what this does is creates a new REST API for you. And in theory, it opens up. Did I click cancel? I clicked cancel.
Oh.
Click create.
It doesn't work if you do
cancel.
that. Gotta give it a name and hit create.
Yeah, click create. And it opens up this REST service definition window. And then you fill out all the information that it needs. So resource URL is the endpoint. So close this down and go look at useless facts. Useless facts lives here, uselessfacts.jsph.pl. And then on that resource URL, there's two actions that are available to me. If we go and look at this one of them is this random fact endpoint. And it takes the format, the path to it is /random. So it's that URL that provided and then / and then everything after that's what you need to call. And it takes a couple parameters. It takes a format in the URL itself. And then there's this optional language parameter that you can pass in to say like English, please, or German. And then the type of method it's a get. If you have a post where you're sending data up, this would be post. And then the access, is this public, is it private? And then there's a whole bunch of authentication stuff you can set up if you need to log in. So that's the REST service definition. You can set this up for all sorts of them.
Yeah.
So I set it up for useless facts. And I have an example script where I'm calling that. Here we go. And the way that that whole web service stuff works, if you've created one, is we have a namespace called REST references, where an Xbasic class gets created for you to call those endpoints. Then it's named after this name right here, useless facts. That name right there is going to be what you get in that Xbasic. And you can insert this stuff very quickly from the Genie using the REST reference call. Yes. So down here is useless facts. This is the one I added, created for myself. A few others up here. Sample is one I also made. But here's the two methods I can call on it, and it generates all the Xbasic that I need to call here and provides some comments about what the optional parameters are if I need to provide those. So then this calls it here. This is calling it. I create my useless fact object. I set up my arguments, my format. Useless facts lets you bring back the data as JSON or HTML or a number of other data formats. And then language, EN for English. And then I call that endpoint and it returns to me a result value. If that result is true, then it succeeded and I can do stuff with it. So then we call this .result parameter on it to get the data that was returned to us. Otherwise, we show an error. And if I run this, we can see it in action. There's my useless random fact. So in this case, if I wanted to save result off somewhere, I could at this point do something like put it in a session variable or store it in a database. If you're on the client side, you could put it in a JavaScript variable, store it in the window object.
Now, does the result also include the header that you get back from making the request, or is it just the body that you get back?
So in this case, result is the body. It's the actual HTML generated by the endpoint. and we can put a debug one in here to break into that.
Let's do it.
So if I look at obj, obj, which is my
Mm-hmm.
the result. This is what it gave me back.
Is the,
Yeah, so
I
it's just
see.
the HTML.
Yep.
It doesn't give me anything else here, unfortunately.
Mhm.
In this case, I don't know. Well, we
Well,
could look at
in
what
this
happens
case,
if
they're
we.
just looking for the body, so it's okay that we don't get the headers back. I was just
Yeah, so
wondering whether or not you need
that's
to parse it any
so.
further.
Yeah, if I give it JSON here and we break into that, I should see something else for status return. That's great. Did I document that when I set this up? Oh, I have to use .json.
.json. There you go.
.json. I'm very glad I documented what I was allowed to use there. I'd already forgotten. All right. So in this case, the result that, yeah, this is just giving me the body. So this
You
is
get the
just
body
giving
back.
the JSON that came back.
That's fine.
And there's no headers in that at all.
Mhm.
Now, if you're using another method like HTTP fetch, then
Yeah, you can get more stuff back as a result.
you're gonna get a lot more stuff back.
Mhm.
And we have examples and documentation on how to use that method. I can
Mhm.
pull that up. It would be nice to know, like we can talk about. There's all sorts of ways to do things to fetch data. So here's HTTP fetch. And you run it. We give back an object, and that object has a variable called error code. You want to make sure that no errors occurred.
Mhm.
And then you want to make sure that the status, the HTTP status, was also successful before you try to do anything with the body,
Mhm.
which is stored in result.body.
Yep.
But here again, you could save that off somewhere.
And then there are various Xbasic. This person's interested in writing it to a local file, so there are different things that you could do for writing that result to a file.
If you wanted it to, like, if you're running the classic server, you could use like a storage connection to your disk to just dump it into the disk and then read it back out later. That would be pretty quick to set up.
Yep.
And I recommend using storage connections because you don't have to do all the rigmarole of trying to decide if the storage.
And does that give you some flexibility later on if you wanted to use say S3 instead of the disk as your storage?
Yeah. So you could
Nice.
write it to disk. You cannot use disk on cloud.
Right, because we don't know you never know what server you're going to hit.
You never know what server
Be
you're going
written
to
to
be
the
on
wrong
if you're
one.
going to get the same server that you saved it on. So you can't do it there, but you can put it in S3 or really anywhere that's supported on storage right now. So, but yeah, you would just save it to file, save data to file, saves binary data to storage. So that's the very easy way to set it up. And I like using storage because I'm not sitting here wondering like what was the path to where I'm saving these on my server. Like I set that up in my storage connection string settings earlier on, and I don't have to think about it later. So definitely use that. Yep, and then it's easy enough to retrieve it back because you gave it an item name, so you can look it up using that item name later. Yeah.
Thanks. So here's a great question. The question is, I don't know anything about IndexedDB. What is it?
What is it?
What is it? That's the whole question. I love that question.
If I'm brutally honest, I don't know anything about it either.
So IndexedDB is like a SQL database, but it runs, I believe, all in JavaScript.
Yeah, it's
so think
of
it as
something to do with web workers, and it's part of the web API standard stuff with the website. I was literally going to put a link to this in documentation when it gets published. So
yeah,
here's the Mozilla rundown on it. But it's basically just like having a database in the browser for your.
You can have like a SQL database right in the browser. I mean, you know, SQLite is kind of like this, but this is one of these things that you can log it. You don't need to have you don't need a Cordova app or anything like that. This will work with desktop as well. So you get the benefits of having it. Now, of course, you're limited to what the browser lets you store. You know, there are limits there, but as we've been seeing with progressive web apps, there are ways around those limits, and IndexedDB is often used in progressive web apps.
And I believe the support for this is quite wide at this point.
Yeah. So it sounds like we're going to be doing a webinar on it. If I had to guess, we'll get our
Oh,
editorial
probably.
calendar out.
Let's do it.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it's going to be good stuff.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we've got 15 minutes left, but I don't see any other questions.
No questions.
Does that mean we can have lunch early? We'll see. We'll give everyone a
Maybe.
minute. Remember that you can always send your emails, send your questions also to guides, GUIDES @alphasoftware.com. Happy to give you answers for that. It looks like we're going to wrap up. So, hey, Sarah, thanks so much for presenting today. Thanks, everyone, for showing up and asking questions. We hope to see you at next week's webinar. Until then, stay well and take care. Bye-bye.